We're on. Closer.
Is this one on? This one is on. I will just take my technology to the microphone. How about we do that? All right. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Wyoming Community Service Providers 2026 Gubernatorial Forum. On behalf of WCSP and our member organizations throughout the state, we appreciate your attendance and commitment to learning more about the future of disability services in our great state. I want to thank our partners with the CDC here in Casper, Wyoming Independent Living, the Wyoming Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, and the Natrona Collective Health Trust. Together, we can and we will influence public policy that will positively impact people with disabilities. Tonight's forum is dedicated to one important purpose, and that is providing Wyoming voters with an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates on issues affecting individuals with disabilities. For decades, Wyoming has worked to build a system that supports people with disabilities in living, working, learning, and participating fully in their communities. That system relies on strong partnerships with state government, providers, self-advocates, families, employers, and communities. As our state faces workforce shortages, increasing service demands, and growing financial pressure, the leadership of our next governor is going to play a critical role in ensuring these services remain strong, sustainable, and person-centered. This evening is not about politics. It's about people. It's about ensuring that every Wyoming citizen, regardless of disability, has the opportunity to live a life of dignity, choice, and inclusion. Let's begin by welcoming our moderators. Welcome to our first moderator, Susan Stubson. Susan is a sixth-generation Wyomingite, musician, attorney, and opinion writer whose work focuses on politics, public safety, and the role of humanities in a healthy democracy. Her essays and opinion pieces have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, U.S. News and World Report, Wyofile, Casper Star Tribune, and Cowboy State Daily. Her thought pieces bring a Western perspective to questions of leadership, civic responsibility, and cultural stewardship. She is an attorney at Crowley Flack PLLP with an emphasis on pro bono services. Welcome, Susan. Welcome to our second moderator, Cheryl Junge. Cheryl is a special educator in the Natrona County School District with over 40 years of experience working with students with disabilities across the spectrum. Cheryl has also worked with community agencies serving individuals with disabilities, as well as employers in the Casper community to employ individuals with disabilities. In her current role as the ABLE coordinator for Natrona County School District number 1, a program that serves young adults 18 to 21, Cheryl focuses on helping individuals develop skills to live and work independently and contribute to their local community. Cheryl has served on the Wyoming State Transition Council, the Wyoming State Rehabilitation Council, and is currently registered as a community service provider. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Thank you very much, and welcome. I think I can speak on behalf of Cheryl, Junge, and myself, is that it's an honor to be a part of this tonight. I think we're going to have a substantive discussion. This is not a debate, so we're really, really looking forward to it. So let's get into it. We're on a short timeline, and we got a lot of things to talk about. So we've gotten on your website, all three of you, and we could read your bios, but we thought if you would not mind, and Senator Barlow, let's start with you. If you could just introduce yourself very quickly to this audience, and then we can get started with questions and some formal.
Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Barlow. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm a ranch kid from Campbell County, a veteran, Marine Corps, a veterinarian, a business person. My lovely wife, Kelly, is up there of 35 years. We have two great kids in Wyoming. I should mention my wife is actually a special ed teacher and has been in the schools for many years and as a case manager. And my son was actually a provider in Sheridan for 4 or 5 years. So, and I've been in the Wyoming legislature on the committee that actually deals and addresses with many of these issues for the last 14 years. So it's a pleasure to be with you and look forward to the rest of the evening.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity, for the invitation. This is such a great state we live in, and I'm so proud to be a native of our great state. A little bit of background, graduate of UW Engineering College, a retired Marine Corps colonel, and been married for about almost 30 years, 3 wonderful daughters. My wife has actually been in the healthcare profession for, gosh, as long as we've been married. She's been an RN. She's done all sorts of casework, all those kind of things. And then my oldest daughter right now is starting really her second career in healthcare. She's down in Cheyenne going through a lot of OJT, getting her RN as she's going through. So it's really been something I've been associated with essentially my entire adult life. So, I do believe that we in this state, it is the greatest state in the greatest nation in the history of the world. And I will tell you, there's no reason that Wyoming can't lead this nation in healthcare. And we should do everything we can to be the model in the nation when it comes down to it. With our limited population and the vast wealth that we have in this incredible state, that's what my goal is, and it's to make Wyoming #1 all the way across that. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here tonight. Thank you for coming out on a summer evening. My name is Megan Degenfelder, and I was born and raised right here in Casper. My family had a ranch just outside of town, and I grew up alongside a cousin with disabilities. And so early on, learned and got involved with the CDC, with the ARC, and really understanding some of these issues that we're facing in the area of disability services. I went to school here in Casper, went to the University of Wyoming, and then built a career in the mineral industry, first for a coal company, and then in the oil and gas business. And then I ran for superintendent of public instruction 4 years ago to really reform education. And some of the things that we've really focused on have been around parental rights and parental engagement, understanding and navigating the system. And our special education team really bolstering, in particular, deaf and hard of hearing division, ensuring that we had the adequate resources that we needed there. And running for governor because I care about this state. I'm tired of young people leaving the state feeling like they don't have a future here. And I truly believe that Wyoming's best days are ahead of us. And so anxious for the conversation tonight. One of the major roles of government is to provide resources for our most vulnerable and ensure that those services are accessible and provided to those with disabilities. So really grateful to be here and grateful for all of you.
All right. Can you hear me? All right, perfect. Our format for tonight is the candidates have received the questions in advance of tonight's session and had a chance to look them over. We will be giving a little bit of background information prior to hosting the question, and we'll take turns alternating them between candidates. Each candidate is asked to limit their responses to 2 minutes and to make their comments to the audience. At the end of our questioning period, the candidates will have 3 minutes each for closing statements, and if time permits, they have graciously agreed to take questions from the audience that you might have. So let's go ahead and begin. The Center for Research on Disability shows that nearly 15% of Wyoming residents are living with some type of disability. How will you ensure that people with disabilities have a meaningful voice in shaping state policies, programs, and decisions that affect their lives? And let's begin with Megan.
Well, this is a wonderful question because decision-making shouldn't just be in the capital of Cheyenne. It should be based on the voices of the people that we represent. And so having a meaningful voice at the table, ensuring that it's not just meeting once a year to get together, but actually being involved in proactive policymaking. We have to ensure that our individuals with disabilities, their providers, their family, their advocates are involved in that policymaking early on. And I know all too well the bubble that exists in Cheyenne. And so when I entered as superintendent, we started to create stakeholder cabinets where we did just that, having evening sessions with parents, with students across the state to ensure that we were adapting our policy based on the needs of those individuals. As it relates to our vision outreach and our deaf and hard of hearing team, we recognized that we needed additional resources there. And so we're able to build that. And then as we were implementing that, recognized that we needed input from folks across the state. And so myself personally started to host those sessions with parents, with advocates across the state to make sure that we were implementing that with fidelity. And so it's about making sure not only that the voice is heard, but that there's accountability there, there's transparency in decision-making, and then we have metrics to make sure that we are delivering on the needs of the people that we serve in the state. And so paramount to our decision-making has to be the voices of individuals in this room, and that's what I intend to do as governor.
Thank you. Let's go next to Colonel Bien, please.
Well, I will tell you, folks, I do think this is all about, it's all about leadership and it's all about listening. This is about regular engagements, regular town halls, getting the community involved, all the way through, because we know that Wyoming's very disparate. We're very rural and we have those different requirements around the state, but it really is a matter of getting out there and listening. And, my last life, I mean, that's what I did, is it really shaped me for this, to get out and do what we call battlefield circulation, understanding what's going on and really shaping it from there, because it really comes down to defining what the requirements are. And of course that shapes policy, which ultimately will dictate, or at least a pathway to some sort of legislative requirement, whatever that is. But it really is a matter of listening and figuring out what those requirements are out there, because we know that across this state, we've got that. We already heard the percentage of it, and we are spending a significant amount of money all the way across on healthcare. I mean, it's essentially the largest portion of our budget. So I do want to make sure that money is going to its intended recipient. And this is a matter of ensuring that the priority is the patient, and that the focus is on the provider-patient relationship. That's where it has to be. We got to get away from on the big bureaucracy here and figure out, those things as we audit, as we go along, as we do gap analysis across the board, we figure out, okay, what's efficient and what's not, what can be streamlined, what can't. Those things that, potentially aren't doing what their intended purpose is, let's redirect them, or let's get rid of them and somehow figure out a something else to fill that gap. But it really does come down to that focus, to that priority, because that is going to dictate what we do in this state and how policy and ultimately any sort of legislation is going to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Senator Barlow.
Well, this one, 15% in Wyoming have live with some sort of disability, but 100% of us have access to our government. Every one of us. Now, there are certain tracks that you have, and you saw this nice flyer for this evening, the Governor's Council, which has representatives from across the state of Wyoming, families, providers, agencies. That's one of the primary ways that policy makers are educated about these opportunities. The provider group that put this on, those are the folks that are advocating on behalf of families at the Wyoming legislature, and I've interacted with them many times. And then you as individuals living with disabilities and your families, your voice matters in this discussion. It matters the most. And I look forward to continuing to have those discussions with you, because you're the ones that can actually guide meaningful things for the future of Wyoming, for the betterment of your lives and all of those in your community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, question number 2. This is about community-based services. And a little bit of housekeeping. I think what we'll do is we started with Superintendent. I have a feeling you guys have done this maybe once or twice.
Yeah, we've done it. We'll straighten you out if we need to.
Thank you. And I would ask the audience, we're doing a pretty good job, if we could hold our applause so we can hear the candidates and get through as many questions and responses as possible. All right, here's the question. Community-based services. They are the lifeline for individuals with disability to live as independently as possible in their community of choice. Not only does community-based living support the independence and dignity of those living with disabilities, it's also more cost-effective than providing services in an institutional setting. Here's the rub. In June, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a memorandum reinterpreting the landmark 1999 Olmsted decision, which protects individuals with disabilities from unnecessary institutionalization, including nursing homes and state hospitals. That decision basically said unjustified institutional isolation of people with disabilities is illegal under the ADA. So here's the question. What will your administration do to ensure that Wyoming residents with disabilities continue to receive state and federally funded services in the most integrated settings? Colonel, we'll start with you.
Well, this is a great question. Wyoming leads in Olmsted implementation. It can always be better, and that's what we need to do. And this, again, that home-based or home and community-based services is absolutely critical here, because the family is the key. The family's the key here, and we got to make sure that there is, like through Project Out or even Skill Bridge, even though that's more veterans related, but that those programs are very, very robust to where we can get these folks and as they reassimilate back into society, that we have those requirements. We know what's going to be needed to actually reintegrate them back in there. And that comes down to that relationship between the family and the respective caregivers, wherever those are. And of course, we know we have some deficits in this state when it comes down to those caregivers. So I think across the board, when we look at trying to fill that gap wherever the community is that, okay, what are the requirements out there for a lot of these folks? Because obviously they're all individual requirements. And then figuring out where do we find the providers for this? And, right now we have reciprocity. We know with different nursing, with different states, and maybe we look at doing reciprocity with some of our other physicians out there in different states to actually have that ability to at least contact them, whatever those kind of things are. But let's look at the services that are already in the community, make sure they are actually integrated with what needs to happen. And we know we've got the 211 service to where it's obviously confidential, to where we can find those local services that are actually out there in whatever community that is. But it's one of those things. We have a lot of different programs out there. Let's see if we can't integrate these better, and again find the kind of gaps that are out there, and then see if we can't mitigate those somehow. But we definitely got to do this. I think it's great. The whole onus behind the Olmsted, I think, is fantastic, because the family knows best, obviously, what's in the best interest of that disabled individual. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're good.
I thought we'd done this before, hadn't we?
So just because the federal government interprets something and we think it's incorrect, doesn't mean we have to follow it. Wyoming can do the right thing. We can take care of our citizens in a meaningful way. And there's a continuum of care that we need to actually acknowledge here. It's our child development centers. It's our K-12 education system, where we have special ed and we have the services provided there. And then as folks are maybe qualify for the waiver in that system. And then obviously as they become adults, how do we make those transitions? How do we support them in the best, most meaningful way? And the state of Wyoming has all of that in their hands. All of that in their hands. We don't need to worry about what the federal government says. If we're getting it wrong, Wyoming folks will be pleased with what's occurring here. And we can do that the Wyoming way, taking care of our citizens. Thank you.
Well, community-based living and community-based services is the priority. We know that individuals with disabilities, they want to be in their homes. They deserve to be in their homes. They deserve to live a life with dignity and feel involved with the community that they live. And we know this in the education space through a least restrictive environment. We know that it is better for students to be learning alongside all of their peers and a part of that community. And so we have to prioritize that community-based living. And so number one is ensuring that we are protecting our resources to be able to provide those services. But then number two is how do we remove barriers to access those resources? And then that's a lot what we're talking about. And the fact that community-based services, the wait list is unacceptable to be able to receive these. And so how do we get actually the federal government out of the way? How do we analyze, how do we provide that type of resource directly to the individual? That's exactly what we need to focus on here. And I believe that we're gonna get a little bit more into discussion over wait lists and federal waivers. But that's something that the governor, that at the state level, we have got to tackle. Because you need the resources, but you also need the access to those resources for individuals with disabilities to really be able to thrive and to do so in their own environment. We know that that's where they want to be, and we know that that's even cost effective. And so how do we continue to prioritize that as a state?
Thank you. And along those same lines, one of the fears is that we may have individuals moving into our state to access services that other states are not offering as well. And there's currently 537 individuals with developmental disabilities awaiting services through the state's home and community-based waiver program. 407 are children and 130 are adults over the age of 21. So our question is, how will you as governor work to decrease this wait list to ensure that individuals with disabilities have access to those critical services? And we'll start with Senator Barlow.
Thank you. So the governor has two principal responsibilities when it comes to this issue, in my view. One is making a budget recommendation. A budget recommendation to the legislature that says we need to fund the wait list so that people have availability of services. Now, I've been in the legislature for 14 years, and we've taken incremental steps up the wait list, I think 3 different times, and reduced the wait list each time. But the wait list grows, right? More people have disabilities, etc. So we also have 2 types of levels of service. We have a comprehensive and we have support waivers. So there are opportunities, and the governor, quite honestly, makes the recommendation to fund it. And if I'm willing to do that for the citizens of Wyoming who would be supported by those services.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Superintendent Degenfelder.
Well, as you mentioned, we do have a lot of folks that move into the state. We see this a lot in education. And Wyoming has always prioritized funding special education and funding for individuals with disabilities. The fact that we have 100% reimbursement for special education is something to be proud of in the state of Wyoming, because we take care of our students with IEPs. So as it relates to these wait lists, with over 500 individuals on the wait list, it's unacceptable. And so a couple of things that we need to do. Number one, we need to look at the caps that are in place. And as governor, I plan to execute a wait list reduction plan where we analyze a couple of things. Number one, what is keeping these caps in place? Is it a funding mechanism from the state? Is it about the waiver process? How do we work with the federal government to improve that process? And then ultimately, too, looking even more upstream at how do we reduce the overall cost of care? And how do we recognize that the better alternative is through community-based services, and that is the less expensive alternative? And so looking at healthcare in general, how we reduce those costs. And then I would add as well, again, thinking more upstream on this, is also really prioritizing in our education system our healthcare workforce pipeline, because we have a shortage of individuals to provide this care. So we could have all of the programs in place that we want, but if we don't have the individuals to provide that care, then it doesn't work. And so how do we create more of a pipeline of individuals that are working in the healthcare space, in the provider space, to be able to provide these services that we're talking about today?
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's absolutely unacceptable that we have that. My first question is going to be why? What is going on here? And actually do a deep dive analysis on why. We know that we have deficits out there, and we know it all comes down to the requirements. And this is a matter of putting a priority on that to figure out exactly what is causing these waits. Are they specialized care, access to that? Is it a deficit in healthcare providers, which in all likelihood is probably a combination of all. And, when I look at trying to bring more healthcare providers here, or at least keep them here, we do have to ultimately reduce the cost of living in the state of Wyoming. And we got to get these other industries going that used to, that really ignites our economy. And obviously that's our energy, that's our agriculture, that's our tourism, and those sectors. To get this economy going, because that ultimately it comes down to the free market and trying to entice people to come here with these specializations. And then of course, if there are gaps, if there's funding that's required, then okay, hey, let's look at this. Let's make sure it's the most cost effective, and we've got to cut the red tape on so much of this. We have to, and because that's the wait list. Typically, that's one of the biggest reasons behind the waits is just the inordinate amount of red tape, the patients have to go through, or even the providers too, and to make sure that they are getting the Medicaid reimbursements that they are entitled to. There's so many things that play a role into this, but my first question is going to be why? What is really causing this? And to do a deep dive in that and attack it right away.
Thank you. The next question. Direct support workers are the cornerstone of waiver services, providing support and services in individual homes, employment, and in their community. Lisa Rumfro, DSP3, knows firsthand the challenges and rewards of working as a direct support professional, and has some comments. I'd like to have her come. Oh, actually, she's out in the audience, and she has her very own microphone. So Lisa, you have the floor.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Rombo. I'm proud to serve as direct support professional supporting adults with developmental disabilities in my Caspers. I've been in this field for many years, and this past year I was honored to be named the 2025 Wyoming Direct Support Professional of the Year. This work is incredibly rewarding, but also deeply challenging. Every day I help people build skills, stay healthy, and live meaningful lives in their homes and communities. I have helped people learn how to cook, find jobs, make friends, and overcome fear. I support people in improving their health and wellness by teaching 6+ healthcare classes and wellness classes per week. These victories are what keep me here, not the paycheck. Because the truth is, the pay is simply not enough to make ends meet. Most DSPs earn less than what it takes to support their own families while providing life-sustaining care to others. I typically work 50+ hours a week to pay the bills and put food on the table. We are trained professionals doing complex work, administering medications, and managing behaviors, coordinating care, and ensuring safety around the clock. The work is demanding, the turnover is high, and the burnout is real.
Thank you. There's a crisis level shortage of these workers, as you just heard, highly skilled, professional, trained workers, such as Ms. Rumfro, due largely to the inability to earn a living wage. The average direct support professional in Wyoming is paid $15.50 an hour. That's 73% of a living wage. The turnover rate, unsurprisingly for these professionals, is 47% in their first year. That's why we call it the crisis level. Here's the question. What actions would you take to support recruitment and retention and strengthen this critical workforce? And Superintendent Degenfelder, we will begin with you.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to tell you that the work that you do changes lives. It changes communities, and it changes our state. And you deserve a living wage, period. And so we have got work to do. to make sure that that occurs. And actually the gap is just widening, because I've been talking this week with folks in institutional schools, within our child development centers, of the fact that sure, we increase salaries for our teachers, but now we're seeing those effects that are outside of our public schools that are falling that much further behind. And so how do we do that? Number one, we need to ensure that you're being paid a living wage. And then number two, how do we reduce the cost of living in the state of Wyoming? How do we reduce the cost of housing, of healthcare, of being able to just survive in our state? Because it's becoming unaffordable, and that's why so many young people are leaving the state of Wyoming. And then when we see this retention, 50% retention, it's unacceptable. We can't have that. And the same type of issues we face with the teacher shortage. And so when I got into office as superintendent, I executed a teacher retention and recruitment task force. We did a statewide survey. We had a stakeholder group that got together, and we talked about what the top 3 issues were that were keeping teachers from staying in the profession. And then we went after those. And so one of those is going to be the pay. But I bet there's other issues there in terms of burnout that we have to address. And how do we support the individuals that are doing the important work that we're talking about today? And so that is the role of the state, to come in and be helpful in that, and then figure out how do we ensure that that happens for our individuals in this sector.
Well, ma'am, thank you. And I've heard several of these stories around the state of folks very similar to what you do, and it takes a lot of heart to do what you're doing, knowing full well that there's minimal pay associated with it. You know, ultimately with me, it does come down to reducing the cost of living in the state. And, you know, I'm targeting taxes. I'm targeting tax cuts across the board. You know, I'm targeting, you know, whether it's fuel tax or whatever it is, our residential property tax, to bring these costs down. And, you know, if we can lower the cost of living, naturally that provides people with the opportunity to raise their standard of living. And then, of course, you know, it does come down to to making it more conducive, you know, to bring other folks into the state, or maybe encourage even our younger folks to get more involved in it. But they've got to be able to live here. And that's really one of my primary objectives here, because all these things, as you know, they're all tied together. And as we can as we reignite this economy, particularly through our energy sector, I really do think, and then we leverage what we have, not just in reserves, but, you know, and really pushing to make sure that we do get these federal reimbursements in line. And all these things coupled together, you know, ultimately it should, you know, and my plan obviously is to look at what kind of healthcare we can do with increased cost of living when it comes down to yours, and then a direct correspondence of reducing the cost of living to make it more tenable for you. And of course, as we build the pool, then you know, it will hopefully lead to as much burnout for you. But I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you for your work, and thank you to all the providers in this room and who may be listening for the important work you do. The state of Wyoming every 5 years has a responsibility to take up rebasing. Some of you have been through that process, and it's a method of finding out what the cost of delivering care is in a community, and then improving the reimbursement rates that you give out there, which then gets translated into hopefully higher salaries for the folks who are providing the care. So I've been in that process 3 times. Part of that process as a member of the legislature, representative twice as a member of the House Representative, and once as a senator. And each time you go to a different level. One time we overshot because we knew it was 5 years before we did it again. So it's a challenge. In the education world, K-12, what do? We call it recalibration, but then we do an ECA every year. Every year, we actually add to the money, so there's something meaningful increases to provide services, because the cost of care, the cost of living, all those things continue to, inflation continues to eat up your earning power. So we'll continue with rebasing, no question about it. That's a statutory requirement. Maybe we need to adjust it to have that ECA or something meaningful like that, so you have something incremental in that 5-year period.
Thank you. So in addition to our crisis employment for DSPs, we also have family members that are frequently the major providers of long-term care for individuals with disabilities. This is often a demanding, around-the-clock job that involves a complex host of services and supports. Yet caregivers are facing exhaustion and burnout at record levels. How will you as governor enhance the resources available to caregivers to ensure that individuals with disabilities continue to receive care in their home and community?
Oh, this is a great question, and this is really a dovetail on what we were just talking about. I mean, we've seen an example right here, and I know there's many examples probably in this audience. And it is a matter of building that pool. It's a matter of figuring out what, even if it's family members doing this, because we know that, you know, they're closest to it. And when they need that respite, we got to make sure that we have the resources there to provide that respite, whatever it is. And again, this is obviously regional. We got to get as much of the community in there as we can. And folks, we really got to get this free market going. You know, when I look at healthcare in total, you know, I want price transparency across the board. I want tort reform to reduce malpractice insurance, to better incentivize these caregivers also to come to the state of Wyoming. And so as we do that, as we throw these requirements out there, it's very important that we recognize, and of course it comes up to the individual too, to recognize their limitations, because we all have limitations on when it's time to have that bit of respite. We have programs that are already out there. Let's look at those, see if we can make them more efficient, whatever it is. And again, build that pool. And of course, this is working with the community colleges. This is working with UW to kind of see what the regional requirements are. And of course, understanding through constantly listening to the folks in that community, the families that are actually dealing with this, what kind of requirements are necessary, both at the local and the regional level, to where we can actually provide the respite for those healthcare providers.
Respite is one of those services that's provided in somebody's service plan that they have. They need to have enough flexibility and probably more funding provided for respite, so those family members have an opportunity to to get that little bit of break, to have some time to recharge themselves, so they can come back even stronger to support their family member, their loved one. So it's about more funds and more flexibility in those individual plans for respite particularly.
Well, this one is really personal to me as I saw my family, my cousin and my aunt and uncle go through this and really do so much for my cousin and have tremendous sacrifice to be able to do that. And so what's really necessary here is the availability of care, flexibility of care to be able to balance that in the home, but then also with respite care. And then also being able to navigate the system. The system in state government, federal government, it shouldn't be so complicated that it's just a runaround. And then you feel like your email is just getting forwarded to this person, then to that person, and you're not getting the answers that you need. And feeling like no one is looking out for you, and it's too confusing to even know what is available to you. And so that's our job in government, is to create greater efficiencies, make sure that parents, that individuals, that family members, they know the resources available, and that we are a partner in this rather than a roadblock.
Thank you. This next question is about education. Wyoming law currently limits developmental preschool funding to children through age 5. While parents of a typically developing child have the flexibility to decide whether their child is ready to begin kindergarten or would benefit for an additional year of preschool, families of children with disabilities do not have that same choice. When a child receiving developmental preschool services turns 6, families are often forced to leave the preschool setting, even when their IEP team and parents believe another year would provide the greatest educational benefit to that child. If parents choose to keep their child in preschool, they must often give up the services guaranteed through the Individualized Education Program, that's our IEP, and instead receive a service plan with significantly fewer protections and supports. The Individuals with Disability Education Act, that's the IDEA, as many of you know, recognize that eligible students may receive special education services through age 21. Parents, in partnership with the Children's Educational Team, should have the same opportunity as all other families to determine when their child is developmentally ready to transition to kindergarten. Child development centers across Wyoming are working with legislators as we speak to amend that law so that funding eligibility better reflects children's developmental needs rather than adhere to a rigid age cutoff. To speak more on this issue, we have Sarah Larson, who's in the audience. Please welcome Sarah Larson from the CDC.
Thank you. I'm going to share the story of two Wyoming families whose lives were directly impacted this year by the statute. The first is a young boy in our developmental preschool program with autism. At the end of his 4 to 5-year-old school year, his parents and his educational team all saw something remarkable happening. He was making tremendous progress, and they believed that 1 additional year in preschool would allow him to build the skills needed to successfully transition into a general education classroom setting. Because his birthday fell only a few weeks before the end of the school year, his parents made the difficult decision to keep him in preschool. During that process, they were told they might have to give up the protections of his IEP simply because they wanted what they believed was best for their son. Fortunately, through collaboration with the school district, he was able to remain on his IEP. That additional year changed the trajectory of his education and allowed him to enter kindergarten prepared to learn alongside his general ed peers. The second family was not so fortunate. Their son needed ongoing speech-language services. Although he was making steady progress, he was still difficult for others to understand and continued to benefit from the structure of half-day preschool program, which also allowed him his daily naps at home. His parents believed another year would provide the maturity and developmental foundation he needed before entering kindergarten. After multiple conversations, they were given an impossible choice: enroll him in kindergarten before they believed he was ready in the middle of the school year, or keep him in preschool and give up the protections of his IEP in exchange for a service plan with fewer rights. It was a heartbreaking decision filled with uncertainty and tears. These families were asking for the very same opportunity that Wyoming already gives every other parent: the ability to determine alongside their child's educational team when their child is truly ready for kindergarten. One family was able to keep both that choice and the protection of an IEP. The other was forced to sacrifice one to have the other. The difference wasn't their child's needs, their parents' commitment, or their educational team's recommendation. The difference was how an outdated statute was applied. These stories are not about extending preschool. They are about preserving choice. They are about trusting parents and educational professionals to determine when a child is ready for kindergarten.
Here's the question. If elected governor, would you support legislation to update this statute so that families of children with disabilities have the same opportunity as other Wyoming families to determine the most appropriate time for their child to transition from developmental preschool to kindergarten, while at the same time maintaining access to their IEP services? Why or why not?
Yes, I look forward to signing that bill.
Why? Two-part question.
Didn't you just hear the testimony? It's a damn right thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. And this has been one of the more heartbreaking topics that has come up in the last couple of years as we've grappled with this and gone round and around with attorneys at the state level at what is, as you mentioned, an outdated law. And it needs fixed. And I appreciate the work of the CDCs, of Mr. Schwartz, that we've been in constant communication with over the last few months of how we in fact get this passed through the legislature. And what's also happening is we're getting to a point where school districts are pitted against CDCs, and that's never a place where we want to be. Where a kid is going back and forth between these institutions, but it needs to be about what is best for them according to their IEP and the environment that they should really be in. And in general, when we talk about early childhood education, we talk about our child development centers, we have got to get more organized at the state with who is leading and where this lives. Because right now, early childhood education, Department of Health, you have a piece, Department of Education, you have a piece. There is no centralized office for early childhood care. And we have got to create that at the state level, and that's exactly what I intend to do.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. I mean, I think that second example is exactly why we need to do this. I mean, the parents, without a doubt, are the best educators out there. They know, and I'm absolutely behind whatever it takes to give the parents the most choice out there. And we know that, as these kids are growing, particularly that young, I mean, they're learning to read. And of course, as they develop, they're reading to learn. So it's so important that we really get that phonics back in there, and whatever it takes, because all these kids, particularly on IEPs, they all learn differently, particularly those that are disabled. And we got to make sure that we leave it up to the parents and we side with the parents, and that the laws back the parents on their choice.
All right, thank you. And along those same lines, with more public dollars going to private school opportunities, the Wyoming Education Savings Act, or school voucher program, allows public funds to be spent on private schools that are not required to comply with federal statutes such as the Individualized Education Plan or 504 accommodations. How will your administration ensure that students with disabilities have equal access to all educational opportunities that are afforded to non-disabled students?
Well, I have fought tirelessly for parental rights in my role as a superintendent, and particularly in the realm of special education, ensuring that our parents have their rights intact, that they feel empowered in their child's IEP and that process. And I have not shied away from conflict that's occurred regarding IDEA implementation in school districts. Sometimes that can be uncomfortable, but we need to promote the parents and make sure that those protections and those resources are in place at the school level. As it relates to students that are selecting to not be enrolled in public education, all of those students are eligible for what is called a service plan that many of you are aware of, and having meaningful consultation with school districts to be able to develop that service plan. Now, I think we have a lot of work to do in there, and actually just as recently as this week, we were visiting with school districts because we also have a new law on the books that does not require notification from homeschool parents to school districts. And so talking with districts about how do we make sure that we are meaningfully reaching out and empowering parents so that they know what resources are available, they know that these service plans are available to them, and what those resources are. And then number two is looking at that proportionate share and how much those districts are spending on these students, and how is that done with fidelity and equitably among students that they come in within the district, but then across the state of Wyoming. And so I think what's paramount is making sure that the parents that select to not be enrolled in public schools, they know what their options are, they know about service plans, and what resources are available to them.
Yeah, I think where ESAs go, I think is great. I think it does give the parents far more choice on what they want to do with their child, because of course they know what's best for them. But as we know, as we just, there's not a requirement there. They're not required by any means to do an IEP or a 504 or along those lines. So I think it's incumbent that the parents truly know, if they're going to elect to be outside of public education, that they know what's actually going to be offered in whatever institution they do. And of course, that additional money, the $7,000, whether that goes to homeschooling, whether it goes to any sort of other, whether it's tutoring, whatever it is, to get their child through. And again, the parents know this based on their coordination through a service plan. But I think we got to also look at what kind of gaps could potentially be out there, because we know that there's not a requirement for IEP. So how do we fill that gap? And this does come down to a transparency issue across the board, and what additional funding is needed for that. So there's some coordination naturally that needs to be required, but I think as we see across the nation, where these states that have significant school choice, and we got a long way to go, a lot more to go on this, because I do believe that parents again are the best educator out there, and they know what's best. But as we see these states that do have significant school choice, particularly the states back east, we also know that school choice is not a direct threat to public education, but more of a complement to public education, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be, and so anyhow, I think it's as we go down this road of more school choice and maybe not having those IEPs, but more along the lines of service plan, I think this does come down to the coordination and making sure that we have that community involvement and that we have those folks have a seat at the table when it comes down to it.
So whether a parent chooses to homeschool, private school, or public school, it seems to me that we have an obligation to provide them, their student, with services, the services they need in any setting. I believe that. My wife is a special ed teacher, has worked in a private school setting, and those students had access to the public school services and the supports that were there. But we do need case managers, we do need folks to help guide them those directions. So while we homeschooled our kids, so I'm familiar with folks making choices about how they educate their kids. But they also need to understand the resources that are available to them while they're doing that for any child that may have a need that is outside of whatever that standard is. Those resources are there. Those resources are there, and it's incumbent it's on the broader community, but it's also on the school districts to make sure that those families understand what's available and helps deliver that to those children.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. This next question is about employment. The Wyoming Employment First Initiative was designated as a state policy in 2014. It is centered on the premise that all citizens, including individuals with disabilities, are capable of competitive community employment. I'd like to welcome Heather Glazer to share her experiences with integrated competitive employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Welcome, Heather.
Good evening. My name is Heather Glazer. I'm here because I believe people with disabilities deserve the same opportunity to work as everyone else. Like many people, I want a meaningful job. I want to earn a paycheck, be independent, contribute to my community, and be valued for what I can do. But finding a job has not been easy. When I go in for an interview, I often feel the employer see my wheelchair before they see me. I have been told I interview well, but then I hear we have decided to go a different direction, or that I don't have enough experience. My question is, how am I supposed to get experience if no one will give me a chance? Even after getting a job, there can be barriers. Reporting my income can often make it difficult, The system makes employment often harder than it should be. I know what is possible because I worked part-time at the YMCA for 2.5 years. They saw me, not my disability. They hired me because of my skills. Made simple accommodations when I needed them, and gave me the opportunity to succeed. Most accommodations are not expensive. They can be as simple as providing plain language materials, larger print, flexible work schedules. Because of transportation, voice recognition software, or allowing a job coach for someone to work the job. Small changes can make a big difference. According to the latest job accommodation network data, 61% of workplace accommodations cost nothing. Accommodations requiring a one-time expense have a median cost of $300. Only 6% involve an ongoing expense. Excuse me. With a median annual cost of $2,400. I am more than my wheelchair. I am a good employee, and I know many others with disabilities who are too. We should not have to work twice as hard just to get to prove ourselves. So tonight, as you answer the question, I ask you to think of me and others like me. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for equal opportunity to work, contribute, and belong. Thank you for taking the time to listen to can be heard.
So this question leads us into our next question of how are individuals with disabilities supposed to get the experience if no one gives them the chance? What strategies will your administration pursue to help employers see the ability rather than the disability? And how will you help create more opportunities for meaningful, competitive, integrated employment?
Okay, well, this is great. And Heather, thank you very much for that testimony. You know, this is that transition from going from whether it's high school or whatever education they came from to the private sector. And this is that public-private partnership of understanding through the IEPs or whatever type of skill sets they have to make sure that we can match that with the skill sets that we have out there in the private sector. And, you know, we've got to enforce ADA as necessary. But you know, this is, we got a long way to go on this one without a doubt, because we know, I mean, we're all humans. We understand that, you know, some of those things that, you know, as people transition out, that they may look at folks differently. And we got to bridge that for one, but we really need to sit there and look at what type of skill sets they have. You know, I was talking to a gal just the other day whose son just graduated. He was disabled at the age of 21. And even though he finished all the requirements with high school, all he got was a certificate basically of participation. He never got a diploma. And I think there's something we need to look at there also. But that should not be by any means be a discriminator to where you can't work in the private sector or even in the public sector if you do get a government job. So it is one of those things. I think this is where the parents, this is where the educators get involved in there, see what skill sets are out there, see if we can't get some training done potentially toward the latter part of their high school era, and to see if we can't get that done at no cost essentially, and then transition in. But there's going to have to be accommodations made, and I think they're all very reasonable. And this is a matter of really getting that private public partnership going to try to match these skill sets. We have it with SkillBridge, you know, for military transitioning out. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing with the disabled.
So this seems like a really remarkable place for the Governor's Council to work with the Department of Workforce Services that has rehabilitation funds to actually give you skills to help support employers who want to make accommodations. And that's a meaningful partnership right now. Now, some of it already may exist, and the council folks are saying, yeah, we got some of that, but how about more of that? How about meaningful things that help bridge that gap, that experience gap that I don't know that she needs any more experience. She did a great job at public speaking, by the way, Heather. So we'll keep her for that. But there are meaningful ways to do this. And in state government, collaboration matters. And with the service providers and families, we can make this happen. This shouldn't be, this is about navigation. You've heard it mentioned before. This is about navigation of the things the opportunities that are there, and then streamlining them when we do find the right combination. Let's streamline those so there's a easy button, for lack of a better term. This is how we get that done for young ladies like Heather.
Well, Heather, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. It is a great example and a testament to the abilities that you have and the productivity you can have in the workforce, and that we need to do better. And we do, in fact, have contracts. The Department of Education has a contract with Workforce Services around vocational rehabilitation, but we can do so much more. And it's about bridging that gap between business and industry and with individuals with disabilities. And sometimes there's just that lack of knowledge or understanding. And so it's our job to be that connector. And as Heather mentions, a lot of this is very simple when it comes to accommodations. At the Department of Education, we have had to make simple accommodations like adding ASL interpreters for our monthly all-staff meetings, changing our productivity software that was a challenge for our employee that had vision impairments. And so ensuring that those accommodations are in place, they're so simple. And so how can we provide that guidebook to business and industry? And then how do we create really a system? And then we're working on this right now with students. And how can you have a high school student that meaningfully works within your company? Well, we at the state, we can create that guidebook and we can help you through this process. And we want employers to get excited about employing our individuals with disabilities because they have so much to offer. And this isn't just about a paycheck. It's about feeling like you have a purpose, like you're involved and committed in your community. That's powerful. And I don't know any business or industry that doesn't want to be a part of that, but sometimes they just don't know how. And so that gap, that needs to be bridged by state government, and that's really what we need to work to do, and we will in my term as governor.
Thank you, Superintendent Degenfelder. Before Cheryl gets to the next question, I just want to add, you know these policies, you read them, you understand the law, but there's nothing like hearing a lived experience. So the folks of you that are here living in this, I think that it's incredibly impactful, and perhaps it might change your answers when you're face to face with us. The statistic that stuck with me, which I want to repeat clearly, 61% of workplace accommodations cost employers nothing. So for the three of you, I hope you take that with you, carry that with you when you're making policies. Cheryl, on to you.
So related to some of the barriers that Heather spoke of, transportation is another area of great concern. In Wyoming, rural geography and a lack of public transportation severely limit independence for non-driving residents with disabilities. This lack of transportation leaves many individuals isolated from life-saving healthcare, employment, social activities, and even shopping for their basic needs. What specific strategies will your administration implement to expand accessible transportation, including on-demand or cross-country options for people with disabilities?
Well, the principal place this can be addressed, I believe, is in the individual accounts, in those individual plans that each person has. To give the caregivers, the guardians, the flexibility to say, these are priorities. And we talked about respite already. But if you can't get to some of the things that are meaningful, whether it's employment, Heather brought that up, or the other things, then you can't participate in those things. So flexibility within those individual plans seems like a really important place to start, because that should be in your control. This could be in the control of you prioritizing the things that you need to have the quality of life, the access to life, to your community that would be meaningful. The second thing, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'll have to learn some more about it, but I was listening to the question again after I'd read it several times and thought about it, is, there are community-based programs already out there. The senior centers have access and transport programs already. Let's make sure that folks with disabilities have access to those programs that are already in existence. And there are numerous parts of those where there's a community bus. It's supported through the Department of Transportation. It's supported by government money. So let's make sure that folks that have those needs or have those transportation challenges have access to things that are already in the community in a meaningful way, plus the one-offs where you may actually have to take a cab, or are there cabs anymore? Sorry, Uber or whatever is out there to go somewhere. That isn't on the route that maybe is being covered in a community. Thank you.
Well, transportation is huge and is often the number one barrier when we're talking about employment or being able to be involved in the community. And so particularly with Wyoming's rural nature, this is an area where we really need to prioritize. And so number one is to really leverage the programs that we already have in place. Are we being as efficient as possible with those programs? I would like to really take a look at coordination regionally and see how we can have better public-private relationships, or partnerships rather, when it comes to transportation. And then look at how we are fully leveraging the federal rural transit program funds. And then also at the state loan and investment board level, we have funds for transportation for communities that we allocate every year. And so are those being deployed with fidelity? How can we better leverage those for our community with disabilities? And then also looking at how do we bring services and care to the individual? And how do we explore that more when it comes to particularly healthcare, whether it's bringing the care to them or looking at options like telehealth. But again, making sure that we have accommodations related to telehealth. And so just making it easier, not having to travel as frequently for medical care, but then providing for jobs, for employment, for activity in the community, making sure that transportation is available.
There are quite a few transportation systems around the state, and I think it's fantastic. I think it begs to be, ask the question, how integrated are these? How well known are they? What kind of capacity do they have? What kind of requirements are out there? And of course, how often are they used? And, I think we look at this holistically and then down regionally and then locally and figure out, okay, what is the best method of providing transportation for the folks that can't transport themselves? And so, this is it's another gap analysis type. And I think we look at, okay, what is actually Medicaid funded and what's not, because we know that there's transportation out there that is. And are we getting the biggest bang for the buck with that? And then, of course, as we look at trying to get the private sector more involved into this, which I think is key, and a lot of this comes down to just setting the tone there of deregulation and cutting taxes, and then establishing that rapport and making sure that the actual person who needs that understands where they can get that transportation resolved. So I think there's a lot of things that we got to do here. We just have to coordinate them better and make sure that the folks out there that actually need it understand how they can actually get it and have access to it. And then, we'll figure out, okay, what other gaps do we have and what can we do to incentivize better transportation coverage in those areas?
Thank you, Colonel Bien. This question is about healthcare. Individuals with disabilities often face increased barriers in accessing healthcare, behavioral health services, and specialized providers due to financial or other policy restrictions. What would your administration do to improve healthcare access and outcomes for this population?
Well, healthcare is a top priority for me and for all of our citizens in the state of Wyoming. I'm a cancer survivor. I lost my mother far too young because we struggled with specialized care and access that she needed and wait times. And my husband is a medical provider. And particularly when we talk about individuals with disabilities, two areas, as were mentioned, are most difficult here in the state of Wyoming. That's behavioral health and specialized care. And so how do we go after those, and how do we make sure that we have the providers and we have access to that care? And again, I'm going to go back to education and workforce, because we can have all the programs in the world, but if we don't have providers, if we don't have people providing the care, then it doesn't matter. And so building out workforce pipeline into healthcare, we have pushed this new HOSA organization that is for students that are in K-12 to be a part of and to get excited about healthcare professions. So building the workforce pipeline is number one. But then number two is looking at how do we provide more regionalized coordination, not consolidation, but we coordinate specialization across regions in the state of Wyoming. How do we then also leverage things like telehealth and get creative about, as I mentioned earlier, bringing care to the individuals in different ways? And then how do we think outside the box? Think about things like residency program in psychiatry right here in Casper. How do we ensure that provider pipeline is happening right here in the state of Wyoming, and we are really fostering that. But healthcare is huge for all individuals in the state, but particularly our residents with disabilities. We've got to reduce the cost of healthcare, and we have to increase the availability and access.
Okay, well, that's a real good question, and a lot of this comes down to my plan on reducing the cost of living and just across the board. But so much of it, we've got the WWAMI program with different universities in different states that we can hopefully recruit from that. I think understanding what the requirements are actually out in different parts of the state. But we've got so many of these things going, whether it's telehealth. This is what I was talking about, reciprocity with specialized individuals in other states, particularly that are pediatricians or some sort of doctors in other states that actually specialize in that we may not actually have here, but that we can actually access via telephone or whatever. And then with mobile healthcare, I tell you what, there's a great way to do it. And, we know that the National Guard has to train once a month, their medical guys, and, send them out there, let them do that type of training. And then if we can expand that even with the private sector to potentially increase that capability across the state. But there's a lot of things that we can do. But I think it's understanding and framing the problem that we have out there, the deficits we have out there. But again, we do need the healthcare providers here. And we've got to make the state more attractive to keep these folks here because we do know that we're very disparate. We do know that we're very rural out there. And so it is, you know, we do fantastic in acute care, but when it comes to chronic, that's where we're having our issues there, and particularly with those with disabilities. And it really is coordination with the family members because they know better on what the needs really are with their family member.
All of Wyoming, every citizen in Wyoming needs better access to health care. The caregivers of folks with disabilities, they need better access to health care as well. I've made a commitment that when successful in the Republican primary on the 18th and 19th, we will have a healthcare strike team. And it will include folks from the disability community and their caregivers to understand what the deficits are, what the challenges are, because January of next year, in collaboration with legislators who are also interested in improving healthcare access for all of Wyoming citizens, we will have a plan. Things will start happening under my governorship because all of Wyoming deserves better healthcare, and certainly individuals with disabilities who have maybe some unique needs, they absolutely have a right to someone who will work for them on their behalf to have better access to healthcare that meets their needs.
All right, thank you to all the candidates for answering our 10 base questions. We do have one final question that we would like to ask you to include in your closing remarks, and we're going to give each candidate 3 minutes in which to kind of summarize their information for this audience. Our final question is, if elected governor, what would a successful first term look like for people with disabilities? And how would you measure that success? I think we're starting with
Colonel Bien.
Colonel.
Right here? Okay.
Sorry, I lost track.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you. This has been a very neat forum. And it really, you know, when I got the questions, it opened my eyes to a lot of things. You know, and I am a results-based individual. As an engineer and as an aviator, I try to look at things as objectively as I can. So I really focus on metrics, but I know it's far more than just the quantitative, it's the qualitative that's out there, particularly with disabled and really with healthcare in general. But, you know, when I look at this, you know, when I look at, you know, with Heather up there, I look at, okay, let's increase our employment, you know, of our disabled. You know, I want to see these positive metrics grow. I want to see better access. I want to see, you know, better comfort levels with the healthcare providers. And so much of this involves, you know, the families being involved with them, but it really requires just getting out there. It requires leadership from the front to figure out what's really going on here and identifying those problems, identifying those gaps. You know, it's about streamlining as much as we can, because we know that we spend just an exorbitant amount of money on healthcare, and we got to make sure we're doing it right. You know, I want to make sure that everything's audited. I want to make sure that that tax dollar is going to its final resting place, that it's being spent statutorily according to its intended purpose. And in this case, we have got to make sure that the priority is the patient, regardless, you know, of whether they're disabled or not. We've got to do that, and we got to make the focus the patient-provider relationship. That is absolutely key. You know, right now, you know, as we sit here and we look at some of the numbers out there, is this huge, you know, between $2.5 and $3 billion we're spending on the state. And then, of course, we get so much matching money there federally. And of course, it's all taxpayer money. But, you know, we see roughly about 35%, maybe 30% of that to actually get to the patient provider. And the rest, just a vast majority of it's actually going to the bureaucracy of it all. Okay, we need to refocus. We need to reprioritize what we're actually doing with this money, because the money is there. It's a matter of doing the analysis and figuring out how to best use it and getting this economy going again in this great state, because it is the greatest state in the nation. And folks, with our immense wealth here and our low population, all it takes is will and the desire to do it. And we should be the model in this nation. There's no excuse that we're not. You know, and until we're number one in healthcare is one of those things across the board, you know, I will never be satisfied. But it is a matter of getting out there, recognizing what the problems are, framing those problems, coming up with courses of action to fix them, and then carrying through. But it's got to be local. It's got to be the family members. It's got to be, everybody's got to get involved in this to figure out the best way to solve these problems. But We got a lot of work to do. I'm willing to do it, and I really appreciate you guys taking part tonight. Thank you very much.
So this is a combination. Answer the question and close it out. So success after the first term. I don't want to wait 4 years to have success in your lives, your family's lives. I want successes to be in the first year, the first 6 months. I want meaningful things to be happening. I want living wages for those service providers out there. I want that turnover rate not to be 47%, to be, 2%, 10%, whatever the average is across other healthcare professions. We can't be the odd person out. We have to be in the norm or better than the norm, because the quality of life, we're talking about quality of people's lives. Quality of life, that's the metric. Are people living better lives? Are the families, the caregivers, living better lives, better Wyoming lives, meaningful Wyoming lives, employed, supported, with the respite, the caregivers, all the different components. So engaging with the Governor's Council, engaging with you, the community, there will be an open door. I've served in the Wyoming legislature for 14 years. I've served effectively because I've showed up, I've listened, I've learned, and then we go do the work that makes people's lives better. Without question. That means we work with the legislature. We have to have a meaningful relationship with the Wyoming legislature. In my experience, it helps me provide that. I understand the process. And I understand many of the folks in this community because I've been working with you and your advocates for 14 years. My name's Eric Barlow. On August 18th is a Republican primary. I'm asking for your vote for a better, stronger, more independent Wyoming where your quality of life matters. I'm qualified to do this because I've lived in Wyoming, raised a family in Wyoming, made decisions about healthcare and education, worked Wyoming as a business owner. My wife is a special education teacher, made paychecks, gone to the bank when things didn't work, gone to the bank when things were working. And we serve Wyoming. We serve at our local soup kitchen. We serve at the Boys and Girls Club. I've served in the Wyoming legislature. When you've lived somewhere, worked somewhere, served somewhere, I believe that qualifies me to lead the great state of Wyoming in a meaningful and respectful way that gives all of us a better life in Wyoming. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again to everyone for coming out tonight and in your summer. I think this has been a great dialogue, and I appreciate you all very much. So what will meaningful results be for me as governor? Well, it's delivering on all the issues that we've talked about tonight. Have we decreased the wait list when it comes to community-based services? Have we increased employment of our individuals with disabilities? Have we done better for our child development centers? Have we increased access to community, to employment through transportation? And not just talking about it and checking a box, but having actual measurable results and accountability in state government. And it also means making sure that we as state agencies, as state government, are doing better at making it easier for our providers, for our advocates, for our families, and not making it so difficult and so bureaucratic that that's part of the burnout when it comes to caring for individuals with disabilities. It was mentioned a couple of times about patients. We're not talking about patients, we're talking about human beings, about people. People with disabilities that have made me a better person, whether they be in my family or those who work in the agency that I lead. Individuals with disabilities make our communities better, stronger, our world a better place to live in. And we have a responsibility to support them and to do better for them. We're really at a crossroads here in the state of Wyoming, I believe. And I think that we have a choice to make if we want status quo or if we want to decide that Wyoming is truly meant to lead and to lead boldly and unapologetically and different and think outside of the box. When Wyoming granted women the right to vote, we didn't care what any other state had to say about it. We said, this is what's best for Wyoming, and then the rest of the country followed. That's the kind of leadership that we need in the governor's office. Someone who will think outside the box, that wants to deliver based on actual results to the people of Wyoming, believes in keeping young people here and ensuring that we have a thriving economy, a strong education system, and that government is working for the people that fund it. My name is Megan Degenfelder. I thank you for being here tonight, and I humbly ask for your vote on August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Degenfelder. Well, all three of you, your work might not be done. We've been pretty efficient. Thank you for honoring our rules and giving us concise answers. We have a little bit of time, and before the forum started, there was a number of folks that said, is there going to be a question and answer period, because I've got questions. So we do have some time, and so what I would like to do now is, if anybody has a question, we've got some folks here that will get a microphone to you and ask a question. I would ask that you keep it civil and concise, and if the party up here is okay with that, I think that there might be some folks here that would like to have the floor.
My name is Casper.
My name is Catherine Burns,
I'm Casper.
and I'm from Casper.
My mom fight from my life.
My mom has fought for me throughout my life to attend public school,
But it was awful.
but it was awful.
I had to go to New York State.
I had to transfer to New York State
School.
to go to a private school.
They would let me get in.
They wouldn't allow me to get in.
And we moved back to
And
Wyoming.
I moved back to Wyoming.
My mom called my town
My mom called Montana State School for the Deaf.
friends.
And I went to Montana
I
School for the
said
Deaf.
that for you.
I stayed there for 3 years, and I pretty much caught up on my education that I had
I
throughout
stayed
here.
in high school for 7 years.
I stayed in high school for 7 years instead of 4 years, so I could catch up with my education.
And also, I big issue with healthcare.
And I have a big issue with healthcare.
That's it.
Last year, I fought a lot.
It's a long story. I got hurt.
It's a long story, but I got hurt last year,
Permanent damage.
and I have some permanent damage from that.
So, my counselor advised
My counselor advised me to get some real therapy right away, some physical therapy, but the healthcare provider would not listen to me.
Okay, my mom is a retired nurse.
My mother also is a
I
retired nurse,
knew a lot about health.
so I know a lot about healthcare from her and healthcare stuff. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's, if we could, adhere to our process thus far, and we'll give each of you the floor if you would like to respond. 2 minutes or so.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. That's brave, and we appreciate it, because I think it helps as policymakers to make decisions. And we've talked a lot about, school for the deaf and if that should exist in Wyoming. And one thing I think we should really look at is partnerships with other states that have those available, and what we could offer in Wyoming. But I think you're right. We talk about the availability of free and appropriate public education and IEPs, and making sure that school districts are adhering to those. And then it's our healthcare system. And then back to the discussion that we've had on healthcare of how do we make that more accessible and you be listened to in that field.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about all that, particularly when the provider wouldn't provide for you, I guess, in the end. So, these are some of the things that we need to listen to. We need to figure out, because obviously with different disabilities, there's different, capabilities. So, and this really does come down to the IEPs and looking at those different programs out there, and then trying to figure out if we actually have that provider here in the state. And if we don't, we got to figure out the best way to do it, whether it's partnerships with other states or whatever it is, to try to accommodate you. So, but thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your testimony, but thanks to your mom for being there with you. And not everybody has that same opportunity, an advocate that's looking out for them. So there's a lesson to be learned right here. You were successful. You had to fight for it. You said you fought. And mom was fighting alongside. So I appreciate you. Thanks for sharing that. And I look forward to both of you being part of the discussion, the solutions going forward. So no other young person has to be in that space or that place. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Any other questions?
I guess I'm just kind
If
of.
you could just real quick, we'll get a microphone to you.
Okay. I was just wondering if there are fundings for family members to care for their disabled family members and how they go about getting them if there are.
You want to go? Go ahead.
Well, there is funding out there for it. It's a matter of applying for it and figuring out the best course of action. I'll have to look into exactly what's out there for you, for family members to do that. But this kind of comes down to that respite thing we were talking to earlier. But there is out there.
Not enough. There needs to be more. We need to bolster those programs. We also, and that goes, this is probably outside of the standard program. And quite honestly, it's been a while since I've been through the rebasing part of this, so I apologize for not having the details on the tip of my tongue. But if there's not enough, there should be more, and not just flexibility within the individual account, but actually a process, because the best care is generally given by family. It's generally given by people who are closest to you, know you the best. We need to make sure they are supported in a meaningful way.
And this gets back to, I think, our question on community-based services and how we ensure that there is a shorter wait list and that there are those waiver requests that go through and evaluating those caps so that we can get resources for community-based living that we know is most appropriate and most appreciated by families and the least expensive.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you all for being here. My name is Sean Griffin. I'm over from Riverton. I work for a program that serves people with developmental disabilities and acquired brain injuries. And we serve the Riverton, Lander, and also Jackson Hole area. My question to you, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, I know this is election year. We have the cost rebasing system in place. It's been funded in full once since 2008. So as governor, would you seriously consider funding that cost rebasing model at the level that the experts say it should be?
Yes.
Yes, I think we need to continue to have that conversation and look at how we have that on a consistent basis also, because I could say, yes, we're going to do it, but that doesn't help. That's a one-time solution. And so I don't think we're looking at how we do this long-term. And I'm not as familiar with maybe the rebasing in your situation, but with the CDCs, for example, in statute, CDCs are to be funded in the same manner as public schools. And that's not happening. And so we are not adhering to statute right now. We finally got the ECA passed for CDCs in 2024. But there's a lot of work to do there. And so I would say too, I mean, what is that consistently looking like? And what kind of formula do we have moving forward?
Yeah, I think that I would, but, I'd have to look at also the whole overall cost of living here. That's, I think, where a lot of this goes. We have an inflationary rate that's about 8 points higher than the national average. So let's try to get this thing down. When we do talk about rebaselining, what are all the other causal factors that go into the actual cost? But it's definitely something that needs to be looked at, without a doubt.
I saw some other hands up there.
Tina.
Tina.
Heidi, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate you being here. This is a little bit on the tagging on to the rate rebasing. But the last cost study said our system is $19.4 million annually in arrears, what it actually is costing providers. And you heard that turnover is 47% in our state. And as a director of a small program and as a fan of direct support professionals, I want a governor that is going to really look at what it costs to provide services in our state. So our last rebasing study that was done in 2023 that was not recommended for funding, again, was 19.4 million. I want to know what we're going to do because a crisis is only a crisis for so long, right? So to say we have a staffing crisis and to say we have a funding crisis, that is only really good for, I don't know, maybe a decade. After that, it's just a systematic failure. So that's what I want to hear from you is what your plan is to fix a systematic failure.
And you're right, because we can keep talking about it over and over again, and then just kind of a Band-Aid approach, but we're actually not solving the system or back to formula and how we're going to address that long-term, then we've done nothing to solve it. And so we need to have that discussion about actual cost, and make sure that we're funding that appropriately. And then ensuring that we have revenues in the state of Wyoming to be able to pay for it. And I sound like a broken record. I talk a lot about energy because I spent my career in the mineral industry. If we produce more energy in the state of Wyoming, we have more revenues because of the way our tax structure is set up and the benefits we can have. And so we have to also find a mechanism to reduce cost of government, find efficiencies so we can pay for these critical needs that we have in state government. And then we need to very simply have a governor that understands the energy business, can produce more energy and make sure we have the revenues to actually get it done. Or else we'll keep talking about it for years and years and nothing will change.
We have to get into a routine audit mode here. We got to have discipline in spending all the way across. And we know that healthcare is exorbitantly expensive. But, again, I want to make sure that these programs that are out there, we do actually understand the cost with them. So this comes down to cost transparency. This comes down to all sorts of those things as we're looking about rebasing. But we've got to get into this mode of trying to be as fiscally responsible as we can, because as you know, this state has upturns and downturns. And we've got to re-energize the private sector all the way across our primary sectors that generate so much revenue. But we have to be frugal because we have to remember that it's all taxpayer money, every bit of it. The government doesn't have a penny to its name. It's all taxpayer. So we got to make sure that there is discipline in accounting, discipline in spending, all the way across the board. If something's, and this is why we have to routinely do gap analysis all the way, on everything, particularly with healthcare, is that we got to understand what's working, what's not. And that's going to give us a litmus on, okay, does this thing need a rudder steer or not? Is it efficient or not? If it's not efficient, let's get rid of it. If it is, okay, how do we make it better? But we can't do that unless we really, really, really look at it on a routine basis. And of course, that's talking with folks like yourself, providers out there, and understanding what the requirements are, because they change all the time, because obviously the demographics change, the needs change. So we really need to look at this, from a very fiscally responsible way of doing it. And I have every intention, that's one of my main things, is to look at all this stuff fiscally.
Government has a responsibility to take care of the most vulnerable, the folks that have the challenges. I believe that in my heart of hearts. We can do that in partnership with our communities, the things that are offered in communities. But as governor, I will ensure that we have a rebasing that's meaningful, that's substantiated, and I will put forth that recommendation to the Wyoming legislature, because ultimately it's the Wyoming legislature that makes that funding decision. But I will advance that on behalf of the community, as long as it's based in a meaningful rebasing, which I've been a part of multiple times. I know it can be done because you folks show up and you do the work at the table to make sure that the services will be provided in a meaningful way and supported in a meaningful way. I will put that recommendation forward, and then you get to advocate with the Wyoming legislature to fund it.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
My biggest concern about healthcare is that people have the tendency of paying out of their own pockets. So my question to you is, if you guys one of you guys are elected as governors, are you guys willing to be making sure to come to a screeching halt on that, or how are you guys gonna prevent that?
prevent paying out of your own pocket? Is that what you're talking about? Well, so this is without Medicaid, this is, well, I think we got to look at what the costs really are, obviously we have insurance out there. This is one reason why I really want tort reform to reduce medical malpractice insurance all the way, because it affects all healthcare providers out there, to reduce that cost that's incurred, because these are shared costs. These are whether just stuff that the insurance may not pay for. So the objective there is to reduce that cost overall. And I think there's ways we can do this by just lowering the total cost of malpractice insurance for one. And of course, price transparency too. And we got to force this at the federal level too. When it comes down to prescriptions, all those other things, we really got to do this. And we got to stand up for Wyoming is what we got to do. So, and that's one thing that I will do is like, hey, we're not going to play this game anymore, whatever it is. Obviously, we'll enforce federal law. But, if something comes down that's not in the best interest of Wyoming, then, I can assure you that I will challenge it.
So maybe you and I are in the same boat, because I'm self-employed, which means I'm self-insured, which means I pay out of my pocket too. But any program that you are eligible for, whether you're a veteran, whether you're eligible for Medicaid or Medicare, let's make sure you're actually having access to those programs in a meaningful way. So that's about navigating the system. That's about making sure the system is actually available to you and easy to work through, meaningfully work through. So there's probably more to your story that you didn't get out in that question, and I'll be glad to talk with you and understand more about that. But let's make sure that everyone who should have access to healthcare in a meaningful way through whatever program that is, let's make sure they're actually getting it delivered. Not just the healthcare, but the process to get that healthcare. So thank you.
Well, we do have a big problem of individuals, particularly young people, that aren't choosing to have health insurance because the premiums are too high. They can't afford the premiums. And so they take the risk, and that's a scary place to be, right? And so number one is, how do we get premiums down? How do we make health insurance more affordable for individuals? That's working with insurance companies, decreasing the cost of healthcare in the country. This is a federal issue that we have to work with our federal delegation on as well. And then being creative. One thing that the state is looking at right now are reinsurance programs. So pooling some of those high costs amongst insurance providers and then being able to reduce overall premiums in the state. And so getting creative of how we reduce premiums ultimately so that more people are insured rather than having to just pay out of pocket if an accident occurs.
Thank you. So I think that we'll stop there. And before we conclude, I'm willing to bet that these folks, if you do have continuing questions, that they would be happy to visit with you afterwards. Let's give a round of applause to our team. I'd also like to recognize our sponsors. Wyoming, it's been a long night. Wyoming Community Service Providers, Natrona Collective Health Trust, the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, Wyoming Independent Living, the Child Development Center. Thank you to our sponsors again. And let's give a round of applause to our two ASL interpreters. I know that there'll be materials on the outside, so if there's additional information that will be available in the front of the theater. So if we learned anything tonight, it's that we've got some work to do. Thank you for being a part of this very important discussion. So regardless of the outcome of this campaign, I hope that you'll continue in your efforts to stay involved and be engaged with this very important community. So on behalf of Cheryl Junge and myself, Susan Stubson, thank you so much and have a nice evening.